the full group that'll be captured, that we can all communicate that way. So that's one way. And let me
one more comment.
Yes.
Yeah, I forgot this added piece because it's new to us. I did want to let everybody know that this meeting is being recorded and at the request of the committee, and also at the opinion of some members of the public. So if you would not like to be recorded, we would ask that you turn off your camera so that you will not be recorded. And and within a week of this of today, we will be posting that recording on the website. There should also be a recording of the chat available, I believe, when we do that. That part's not confirmed, but we'll definitely have the video, and I believe we'll be able to get the chat as well. But this is, I think, our second time recording this meeting, but I did want to let everybody know that it is being recorded. And so again, turn your camera off if you do not want to be recorded today.
Thank you. Sorry. Stephanie Medley's not on the call yet, is she? She's calling me on my phone. So see if I can bring her in. Excuse me for one sec. It's another committee. Well, let's see. I didn't reach her. I'm wondering maybe, Dante, if you're able to try to be in contact, do you have Stephanie Medley's direct number? I know this is bearing with our technical situation.
Yeah, Stephanie just reached out to me, Mr. Chair, and I will work in the background to get her logged in. So
thank you so much. Okay, so before we get to our agenda and our initial public comments, let me just take a second to introduce the different members on this subcommittee. And we have this little orientation that we're doing at the beginning of the meeting to just kind of explain who we are, why we're here, and when you're talking to us, why this group is existing and that context. So I'm Jeff with, as I said, Racial Justice Coalition, which is organizations, individuals, and advocates in community that are working not as government entity, but on that community level. And I'm also a public defender, but I'm not here with that hat on. I'm here as community advocate. And can I turn it over to Lynn to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, I'm Lynn Mackey. I'm the County Superintendent of Schools, and I do want to take a moment to introduce our new Communications Director, who will be my proxy at this meeting, like Terry Keeney used to be. So Marcus Walton, who's on the screen here, Marcus, he has joined the county office as our Communications Director, and will be making sure one of us covers this meeting. And just so you know, I have to jump off at 4:15. Marcus will be here. So,
great. Thank you.
Nice to see everybody.
Welcome, Marcus. Let's see then, can I turn it to Rabbi Jay Levine?
Hi everyone, I'm Rabbi Jay Levine from Temple Isaiah in Lafayette, and faith chair on the Racial Justice Oversight body.
Great, thank you. And Tammy, can I pass to you then? See you on the screen. I think just muted right now.
You are absolutely correct. So hello everyone, I'm Tammy Appling-Kabatting, and I'm serving in the place of community member. So I guess I'll be the one that's passing it to Richard Pinkerton.
And maybe just before we go to other folks that aren't on the subcommittee itself, can I ask to turn to Christopher James for a moment?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris James. I'm a site manager with the W. Haywood Burns Institute. The Burns Institute is a national nonprofit based in Oakland, California, that does race equity work in justice systems, both for youth and adults. We've been doing that for about 20 years in roughly 200 jurisdictions now, and have been brought on to do some consulting with the racial justice oversight body and its subcommittees. Thanks.
Thank you. And I do think, given the size of the room, it is appropriate that we can go around and introduce ourselves. I did want to just chime in before we do that. I was just participating in another space where someone was facilitating and trying to model that a bit as we have work content that we want to do. So if you can try to follow the lead of some of these examples we just had, keeping your comments on the introductory level closer to the 15-second spectrum, not on the 30-second spectrum, so that we can really hit the content that you want to be talking about and the points that we want to be discussing on our agenda, but also respecting the moment to introduce who you are and if you're here on behalf of an organization or as an individual, and if there's a community, a part of the county that you're representing, please go ahead and do that. And I'll then invite Richard Pinkerton, please, to introduce yourself to the group.
Yes, thank you. I'm Richard Pinkerton. I'm a peer counselor in training with the Contra Costa College, and I'm glad to be here. And I was very enthused by the webinar this morning about also racial justice. So thank you for allowing me to participate.
Welcome, glad you're here. Marcus, we were introduced to you, but maybe if you just take a second to introduce yourself also. Marcus Walton, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcus Walton, and as Superintendent Mackey said, I am the new Director of Communications and Special Projects with the County Office of Education. I'm a lifelong resident of Contra Costa County and formerly worked in a previous version of this committee and the task force when in a previous position with the school district in West County. So look forward to working with you all and glad to be here.
Welcome again. I'll just follow the order that I have on my screen, if that's all right, and then turn to Greg B.
Mr. Chair, I think you did get an additional committee member. I think we were able to get in touch with Stephanie, so just let you know that she's in the meeting.
Wonderful. Greg B, if you don't mind my interjecting then for a moment, and if I could invite Stephanie Medley, who's with us, also another member of this subcommittee, to just introduce herself, and then I'll pass the mic back to you, if that's all right.
Sure.
Yeah? Great. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm late. I had a bit of a time trying to get on here.
No worries at all.
I'm Stephanie Medley from the Rise Center and part of the Racial Justice Task Force. Is that all the check-in was?
At this moment, exactly. That's all. Thank you so much.
Right.
And then maybe, yes, Greg. Hi. If you'd take a moment, please.
Yes, I'm Greg B, or Gregory Beckner, rather. I'm a Spirit intern. My company that I'm interning at is NAMI Contra Costa. We're a big supporter of your movement, and I'm just here to show my support and pick up some hours.
Welcome. Glad you're here. Let me please ask Jim or Jimmy V.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jimmy Vicencio, and I'm a Spirit student. Glad to be here.
Glad you're with us. Welcome. And is it Andrew Thompson?
Andrew Thompson, hi. Yeah, I'm also a Spirit student, Spirit 2020, and I'm a student interning at the Office for Consumer Empowerment.
Welcome. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
How about Cynthia Osterholt-James?
Hi, I'm Cynthia Osterholt-James, and I am also a Spirit 2020 student, and I am interning at the Office of Consumer Empowerment, and I'm enjoying these meetings. Thank you.
Welcome. Glad you're here. Fred Getz.
I was muted, sorry. I'm
No
Fred
problem.
Getz. I'm a Spirit student 2020 and an intern at RI International Concord, California.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And then if I could invite Chaplain Creekmore.
Hello, I'm Chaplain Creekmore. My webcam is not working today. I am a Spirit 2020 student. I'm interning at RI International, and I am a chaplain with the East Bay Chaplains of Northern California, and I am a full-time single dad.
Welcome. Good to have you. How about Angie Sisson?
Hi, I'm Angie, and I'm a Spirit intern for Native American Health Center. So I'm happy to be here.
Welcome. Glad to have you. I have B. Hill at CC Health. Let's see. Let me move ahead and we can come back there. Just have that as an email address on my screen. How about Julie? Why?
Yes, hi, I'm with Mount Diablo Unitarian Universalist Church, the Racial Justice Committee. Glad to be here.
Welcome, glad you're here. And Yehudit?
Yes, hi, I'm Yehudit Lieberman. I'm with Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice, and the Contra Costa County Racial Justice Coalition.
Welcome, glad to have you here. How about Laurel Smith?
I'm Laurel Smith. I'm with the Spirit Program, and I'm an intern, and I'm sitting in for the education.
Welcome, glad you're here. And Leah Nocera?
Hi, I'm Leah. I'm a Spirit student interning at OCE, and I'm glad to be here.
Welcome, glad you're here.
Thank you.
How about Melvin?
Good afternoon, Melvin Russell. I'm the Assistant Chief Probation Officer.
Yes, hi, welcome. Good to have you here with us again.
Of course. Good to be here.
Isabel Young?
Hi, I'm Isabel. I'm a Spirit 2020 intern and a UC Berkeley student.
Welcome. Let's see, Lara.
Good afternoon, folks. Lara Delaney from the County Administrator's Office. Glad to be here.
Hi, Lara. How about Jill? Hi, Jill.
Hey there, Jill Ray with Supervisor Candace Anderson's office.
How about Alicia Nichols?
Hi, good afternoon. This is Alicia Knuckles, and I'm with the Office of Supervisor Diane Burgess.
Welcome, glad you're here. Christine Avalos.
I'm Christine Avalos, and I'm an Office for Consumer Empowerment intern for Spirit Program 2020.
Welcome, good to have you.
Thank you.
Certainly. There's a phone number ending in 6253. If you recognize that, welcome you to introduce yourself.
I would remind you that in order to unmute yourself if you're on a call, the key that you must press is star, then the number 6. Again, star 6 will unmute yourself if you are calling in by phone.
Thanks, Dante. And maybe just in this moment, if that may be getting sorted out, Bill at CC Health. or sorry, B Hill rather. Inviting you if you're able to access the audio.
Can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Okay, hi. This is Barbara Hill Howard. I worked with you, Jeff, and Dante on the Second Chance grant.
I just needed to hear your voice, of course. Hi.
Hi. Hi, Dante.
Hello, how you doing, Miss Hill Howard? Pleasure to hear you.
I'm doing well. Still at it.
Glad you're on the call.
Thank you, Jeff.
Of course. So let's see. If I'll just have an open invitation to phone number ending 6253. If you want to, if you're sorting out the audio and you want to take the moment to introduce, you're welcome to do that. Just jump in to do. And Dante, you've already guided us through a few things, but I don't know if I've invited you to already introduce yourself also.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I should have introduced myself at the beginning, but I'm Dante Blue. I'm with the Office of Reentry and Justice, and so our role today will be to help the committee by providing staff support for this meeting.
Thank you again. So let me start off then looking at the agenda that we have for this meeting. And I'm imagining that if you've made it this far and you're on the video call, you likely do have access to that same agenda because that's where this often comes from. But if there is difficulty you're having with that and following along, I think we can probably put on
Hello.
Oh yes, welcome, hi.
This is Edward.
Edward, yes,
Edward
please.
Williams. I'm a member of the Racial Justice Oversight Body, Contra Costa.
Yes, you are. I'm very glad you're on the call, and another subcommittee member.
Right.
So we're
Yes,
increasing our representation. Glad that you're with us. So that just brings us to the agenda that we have for this meeting, and I'll just verbally run through it quickly to say that welcome and new attendee orientation is the first item. Second, public comment on anything that we won't be talking about on the rest of the agenda. 3, we'll go through, hopefully briefly, just the record of actions from previous to confirm what happened last time. 4, we're going to be talking about our youth-led community session, listening session rather, planning. So we're going to be having another community forum coming up, and this is going to be having more of a youth focus, and it's going to be youth facilitated as the plan. 5, going to touch on our plans related to this subcommittee's work, and more specifically, one of those items is building funding for community-based organizations to add to their capacity to provide the services that that they want to be able to provide and the community needs. And then last items are going to be scheduling future meetings and announcements. So that's just kind of a roadmap of where we are. And knowing that we will be ending our meeting at 5, we're hoping to spend the bulk of the time really talking about the youth-led community listening session, as well as the work plan that comes up in terms of the content of this agenda, and of course listening to the public comment, what you may bring to the table beyond what we already have in mind for this session. I will take maybe, hopefully, no more than another 2 minutes to round out what I think would be the orientation, which is that this group is a subcommittee, is a part of the bigger group, the Racial Justice Oversight Body. And that Racial Justice Oversight Body is a continuation of work that's been going on for a few years, had previously been the Racial Justice Task Force. And it's a similar composition. It's department leaders, community-based organizations, and individuals that are coming together as people that care about systems that impact criminal justice, but also all different points of basically the interaction of the individuals and government, and trying to address issues of racial disparity specifically and reduce those disparities that are there, or fundamental inequities, you might say. And that first process came up with these recommendations through a long consideration of different factors, evidence and guidance and different opinions and community input, led to a number of recommendations, the first phase. And those people gave those recommendations, those representatives meaning, gave the recommendations to the supervisors of the county approved the recommendations, or a series of those, and those recommendations are now what we're dealing with in this oversight body. What we're here now to do is to try to put into action the recommendations from before. So that's just to say that we're here now with that history. We have that mission, or that is our mandate, like what we're responsible to be doing. And the expectation is that we're going to carry this work forward, implement it, and then report back to community to assess, is this having the impact we want it to? So hopefully that's somewhat useful. I know there's a ton that I'm trying to cover there, but just in a sense of, you know, what is this group all about? And has this been considered? Just kind of putting that out there as the context as we're going to be talking about these issues moving forward. Maybe with that, just open up to a question before we get to public comment. Does anyone have a question on what I just talked about at that history timeline? And if not, we can move to public comment.
So as a reminder, in public comment for the public, you can raise your hand using the raise hand tool in Zoom, which is usually accessible through the participant list. If you are on the phone and need to raise your hand, you can do so by hitting the key star followed by the number 9. Again, that's *9 to raise your hand. Everybody is muted, so once called upon, you will need to unmute yourself using the icon on your Zoom app, or if you are calling in, you will unmute yourself by hitting *6. Again, that is star followed by the number 6.
Thank you. So let me invite then any first speaker, if anyone wishes to, from
Jill Ray has her hand up.
Please.
Hi there, this is Jill Ray with Supervisor Anderson's office. And I just wanted to take this opportunity with such a nice sized group to let everybody know that the county health officer is encouraging everybody to get tested for COVID. The testing sites are free. They can be found on the Contra Costa Health Services website, the online appointment, and recommending monthly testing, and more often if you're an essential worker in one of those working with vulnerable populations. But the goal of testing is to get 2,800 tests a day, and we need to be able to do that so that we can shift to a new level at the state, and we can open more things up in our community. So go get tested. And the testing turnaround times have been corrected, and so now it only takes 2 to 4 days, I believe. And I was on a call earlier, and somebody said it took 1 day to get their test results.
Thank you, Jill. Appreciate you sharing that.
Mr. Chair, there are no other hands up at this time.
Thank you. Let me just settle in and see if there's anyone having another moment who may wish to. I see that note. Lynn's just sharing that she was able to get results back quickly. Another incentive, another reason why it does make sense, and that those personal narratives too can say, look, you know, this is happening quickly, and it is in everyone's interest that we do testing. All right. Well, there will be opportunities, and I think if you're considering the content of these upcoming items, there's a good bit that can fit in there of what should be included in a youth-led community listening forum, for example, and also what should a plan for capacity building funding for community-based organizations look like. So fear not, there will be opportunities to include your comment in these discussions. And then I'll move ahead on our agenda to looking at the record of actions. Excuse me. Will you share there? Oh, great. I'm just seeing that note in the chat about sharing the location of where the testing is. Is that Ms. Hill Howard? Hopefully that's responding. Just meaning there was a question about getting content on. What was that?
Sorry, I was just going to tell you there's a new hand up from Mr. Richard Pinkerton.
Great.
Yes.
Question.
Thank you. Regarding the.
Hold on a second. I'm just wait for the chair. I mean, I don't know when he's going to call you. I'm just letting him know there's a hand up.
Okay.
Let you know when you're ready. He's ready for you.
I appreciate that. No problem at all. Please, Mr. Pinkerton, go ahead.
Thanks, yes, I just had a quick question about, I've been tested 3 times negatively, and I'm just wondering how often you recommend being tested. Thank you.
Can I put that back to Jill? Is that something that you feel?
Sure. Yeah, the county health officer is recommending monthly, once a month.
Thank you, Jill. All right. And seeing some just additional notes there, there's additional content. Lara, thank you for adding that information in the chat so people have more information, and Jill also in terms of access there. Okay, so next step would be for us to, before we get to our future action items, to just confirm what's happened before. And if you're looking at our agenda packet, this is page 4 of 11. And I sort of have half a mind in a situation like this to do the share screen feature so that you're just looking at it with me, right? Because I think with technology, everything sometimes that can be a little bit complicated to have everything up. So why don't I give that a shot, right? With a little bit of technology experimentation here. There we are. So hopefully you can see there, we're looking at page 4 of 11, and it's just going through what had happened at the previous meeting. This is an opportunity for us to confirm what had happened. We had suggestion of adding definitions of community engagement funding and community-based organization into our glossary of acronyms. And then there's going to be quite a bit of content here regarding the future listening session, but just walking folks through that who may not have been present at the meeting. Those of us who were there will be able to weigh in on whether this is all sounding like what we recall. All right. So knowing that this will be likely too quick for those who had not been there to review in advance, just kind of orienting you as you may be able to go through the packet yourself. Now turning to members of the subcommittee, anyone have any items that would need to be changed or additions?
I make a motion we approve the minutes.
All right, a second.
A second.
Any further discussion on the item? No public comment? What was that? Yes, I believe that's right. Yes.
Yes. All right.
Any further comment from anyone? I'll open up even to community on this. If there's anything further.
All right.
We'll talk even if it's after 4. We'll talk then. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Hearing nothing, I think ready to take a vote.
All right, Mr. Chair, I will do that roll call vote for you.
Thank you.
Jeff Landau,
Aye.
Tammy Appling Kabadi,
She said aye.
oh, I'm sorry, you have to take yourself off mute, everyone, as you come in. Tammy, what'd you say?
Aye.
Aye. Jay Levine,
Aye.
aye. Lynn Mackey,
Aye.
Stephanie Medley,
Abstain.
Mr. Edward Williams,
Aye.
motion carries.
Great. Thank you. And when I say great, I don't mean to be like passing judgment on whether it should have happened, as much as I'm glad we're moving forward. And I also think it was accurate. So there you go. Moving right along, this will take us to, now we're getting to really more of the vegetarian, so I would say like the steak of the thing, but you know what I mean. The real substance here. And the idea is that we're going to be talking about having a youth-led community listening session. So not go over too much territory from before, but I think some folks on this call would have participated in our community listening session that was not with a specific or as specific as we have in mind here, a youth focus. And basically that was an invitation to community to educate us, talk to us about what their priorities are, what they'd like to see shaping our agenda moving forward if we're talking about engagement and funding, especially in the lens of racial justice. And we had very strong turnout, participation, more than 100 people. And also we felt really needs to be, we want to have stronger youth representation, voice in this space. And that for a variety of reasons, but a part of it is just, we felt looking back at that last event, there was not as much youth presence as we were targeting to have. And I think we're trying to adjust to make sure that we are really having a more concerted effort to invite in a way and come to the spaces where we're not reaching, so that we are really genuinely trying to listen. So that's what we had talked about last time, is like maybe we really focus this more of a youth focus. And with that context, let's just move to then what we have in mind moving forward, and maybe we can walk through the notes that we had from last time. The plan would be for us to intend to have the session on November 12th. And we also were talking about who might be able to facilitate. I'll confess, Steph Medley, I had intended to be in contact with you on this and your thoughts of who might be good places to go to, sources for youth facilitation of an event in November. And well, I hadn't talked with you about that, but I know that you have expertise in a way that I don't on this subject. So maybe just inviting you perhaps to kick off conversation on this next thread of, okay, if we were really going to want to have a youth voice facilitating a conversation, do you have thoughts on how we might thoughtfully do that?
Thanks, Jeff.
Putting you
Well,
on the spot, sorry.
I haven't really thought about it, but what I can do is kind of give you a little bit of background of some of the virtual events that we've had over the last few months.
Please.
And kind of give you a little bit about what those have looked like. So we've done things in two different ways. We've had events that are completely youth-led, At the same time, that also means that there's a lot of preparation that goes into supporting youth, especially the topics that they've done have been topics that they've actually been working on and know about. And so that makes it a little bit easier, but there's still a lot of prep work that goes into preparing them for facilitating a virtual discussion that also includes adults. Also, we've done it where we've had youth and adults co-facilitate different sessions. And also we've had it where we've had breakout groups for different sessions. What I will say, sometimes with young people, they may not be readily wanting to talk in front of big groups. And so sometimes having smaller, just like it would be like if it was in person, having smaller spaces allows for more engagement. And so that's just something to think about. And then having a report out at the end of the session. I think one of the things that I'm kind of thinking about is kind of what's the purpose of this particular session. I know that there was the kind of community listening session around the ranch, the proposed ranch closure. And so just wondering what exactly is the purpose for this, and what is it that you want to hear from the youth, and how are you also not going to just extract information from them, but meaningfully include them in to whatever happens after this community listening session. So those are a few thoughts. I mean, I think it's definitely open for to talk about what exactly we would want this to look like, but those are a couple of thoughts. Whatever we do, there's going to have to be some prep with those young people if we're wanting to include them in actually facilitating some type of process. But then also know if those are the same young people that we want to hear from, it's not fair if we just want them to facilitate something and not actually get their thoughts on particular situations.
Yes, this was the sort of expert guidance I was hoping that you would be able to provide to us, and just kind of flag these different areas that are important for us to have in mind. So there's a lot for us to use there, to build from there.
And I think also, I'm sorry, Jeff, to cut you off. Also just thinking about, and I know it's come up in different meetings, but also thinking about how are we coordinating. We have, you know, these different bodies of community advisory groups around the county. And so thinking about how can we also include some of the things that are coming up, especially around youth, in some of those other bodies. So thinking about some of the things that have come up with the Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council, as well as with the diversion subcommittee for the Racial Justice Oversight body as well. And so I do think we should think about how do we integrate all of those conversations.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so maybe to bounce off some of the ideas that you've raised there and points that you've raised there, because it highlights maybe some of the things too that we had lifted or started to touch on the last time. So kind of to the last point that you were saying, Stephanie, about bringing together these different spaces, what's happening in a number of different forms in the county where we're talking about these issues. Jill, Ray, who's also on this call, at the end of our meeting last time, had suggested that there be some communication basically between this subcommittee and the Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council, and more specifically probation, Chief Emmon Krause, about a shared goal really with building community capacity, and in the space of, well, if there's going to be disruption of school to prison pipeline, so to speak, if we're going to be trying to have fewer youth going into a law enforcement type route, they would be diverted where and to what sort of spaces. And we have some sense of what that is, and part of that would be informed by when we're reaching out to youth in a space like this, hopefully, to be saying, what would you want that to look like? What would you need it to be? And then also to the community-based organizations that are providing that work, what would they need to be able to expand the work that they're providing? So that basically is, I think, some ability for us to be overlapping this work in the sense that, well, great, if probation department and the head of probation department feels like this is something that is a priority issue, and we have it built into our work plan that we want to have, and I'm kind of jumping a little bit ahead, but it's connected here. If we look at the end of our agenda packet here, and you have our work plan, part of that is this work of building community capacity. So I know I'm getting a long answer here, but I guess what I'm saying is there is a shared interest. I did speak directly to, at the suggestion of Jill Ray, spoke to Chief Edmund Krause, and I think we do agree, talking with it, that it would be a good thing if we were both in JJCC and this subcommittee were working to have something along that line happen, meaning like there would in fact be a community capacity fund with funding coming from who knows exactly how it gets meted out, and there's going to have to be some kind of robust, I think, participation in spaces like this and JJCC of what that looks like. But yeah, we need more money for community-based orgs that provide the sort of work that we want to see, and perhaps some of like what that would look like, such a fund, and how it would be administered and such, could be the work of this subcommittee. So if we feel that it's appropriate to kind of take on those details, I'm trying to tie all this together to say that we would be having another community listening forum to further inform us on what makes sense moving forward with this. How should we structure something like that, like where money goes and where it's needed and how it gets handed out? That could be something that is with more of a youth voice that's informing. And maybe last 2 points I want to say, and I'm conscious that I'm taking a lot of time to talk, that if you look at our agenda packet and the notes from our last meeting, and especially this is page 5 of 11, there's a lot of content that covers what was talked about. There are some really good points. So want to kind of honor those conversations before and the time was taken. Conversations we had about different ways for youth to submit their content, their communication. So kind of along the line stuff of what you were saying of people feeling comfort in different spaces. Some of it is small groups. Some of it can also be sending in written, either it's a text or whatever, some other sort of means that it can be written submission, and then that can be read either by a facilitator or something like that, different ways to give the content. And I'll just read this bullet point out loud. Questions to ask. We need to be clear what we want from the community during these sessions, be specific about what questions that we have for the community so that the discussions can be properly guided. Questions to ask: what's happening in our community that's creating the school to prison pipeline? What's leading youth to end up in criminal justice system? Why such a high percentage of Black and brown youth in our justice system? So that's questions that were percolating at the last there. Basically, that's what came up at that last beginning of the conversation. And I'm interested to know more about like what the support and if picking up on the thread of what you were saying, Stephanie, of not just throwing someone into this and really making sure that there's support to have someone prepared to be able to do it and like what that looks like and how it best happens, and have me stop talking, turn to you, Stephanie, and then like invite another person to talk after.
I do have a quick question. How much kind of leeway do we have to not have it in kind of this structured how we normally have our meetings? Do we have a little bit of room to change things up a little bit?
Like you're talking to the chair. Yeah, I think we can. I mean, right? This is a space where it seems to me we should be able to push on that.
Okay. And I just want to also, just for us to keep in mind, it's going to be November, which I mean, I think is enough time to plan. However, also thinking about these young people have been on Zoom for, by this time, I mean, it's a really long time. And just from some of the young folks that my staff are working with, I mean, it's taken a toll on them. And so really trying to think about how can we make this at least a little bit more enjoyable for them, because, yeah, I mean, I'm getting tired of being on Zoom as often as I am. And so I know it's really hard for them as well. So that's just something to think about, especially how we're organizing this.
Is there another sort of format that's worked?
I mean, we've just tried to have activities, stretch breaks, leading in some breathing exercises. I mean, we do that with adults as well. So just trying to create some type of interaction. We've had some young people do performances on the Zooms. And so that helps.
Yeah, I love that.
So, Mr. Chair, so if I could add a couple comments for you. What I'm hearing Stephanie say is that this is a pretty intensive undertaking, and that it's going to take some resources, especially if you want to do it right. And of course, that is what we want to do. Even more so, in my opinion, when we're working with our young people, because of I just think that how it prepares them to be so much better in the future, right? So these are our quality investments. What I might suggest is kind of going back on your earlier conversation around JJCC and the interest in how there might be some intersections here, is maybe like having a more robust discussion in that realm. And, especially, if we have a meeting of this body to do a listening session, you get tied into a lot of rules, but maybe if there's interest at the JJCC level and from probation to actually have an event and work with, say, a community-based agency to hold a listening session, right, which might include preparation, might give you more flexibility to work with somebody who has that expertise to work with young people. Because the reality is, anything lifted by this body, we're limited to the capacity of the 6 or 7 people here and their narrow band of expertise in this particular realm potentially. So, those would be my thoughts in terms of what you might explore on how to do this and how to do this well. Otherwise, if you don't go that route, well, then you just need to be prepared to, be very realistic about what the capacity is of your members, and the lift that you'd be asking them to make, in basically 2 months.
Yeah, I appreciate that also, and kind of grounding what is realistic given resources and timing and all factors. I'm thinking as well as, as you're raising that, Dante, if you have a sense, Chris, about what extent Burns can play in helping on this end. The reason why I'm thinking specifically, clearly, Haywood Burns is providing facilitation here and technical assistance, but just because we're talking in the youth kind of lens, and I think of Haywood Burns as having kind of that strength. But I don't know what makes sense in terms of scope of this specific if something that we took on as the subcommittee.
So I think that we have some capacity to help to, once some youth have been identified, definitely some folks who have experience with coaching youth up or even finding youth to facilitate a space like this one. We've done it in the past for CJNY events and things like that. So what that has looked like is youth facilitating like whole regional conferences full of different youth-based or community-led organizations, people of all ages kind of in one room, working to develop a vision and set some goals in terms of strategy for how to move a region forward in terms of race equity and youth justice systems. So I do think we have capacity for that. I think I probably will reach out, and I was going to do it anyway, particularly to Manuel, because I think he'd be a good person to tap into for trying to help to prep youth to do this kind of work. He is in a conference digitally right now, or else I would have had him here for this, because I know that this is what we're working on. But I think especially for next meeting, and we'll see, maybe even in November or however much we need to bring him in based on the ask. Yeah, I definitely think we start there and we figure out what ideas he has.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I know I've been excited about the opportunity to really work substantively with Manuel on stuff, knowing that he's with your group. So I don't know exactly where that leaves us, Dante, in terms of like where this lives. Meaning, I think, given just the back and forth just had with Chris, to have the conversation with Manuel and within Burns, of like, what is it? If we were going to try to plan something, maybe even as soon as November, what seems realistic in terms of capacity there to provide technical assistance. And then also, to your point, Dante, maybe we can have, following this meeting, additional communication between this subcommittee and JJCC to see if there can be perhaps co-facilitation, or I don't know, putting this in the context of what their timeline is looking like, so that we're not having duplicative efforts. And at the same time, I feel like we could probably stand to have many youth listening sessions. More time on that, the better. So that said, we want to be intentional on how we're approaching it. Other voices on this is we're just talking about, I'll invite you to be kind of saying really whatever you choose on this. It doesn't necessarily need to be so technical of who hosts it and when. I mean, part of what we're talking about is if there's going to be a discussion, listening to community members, and I'll even open it beyond if it's going to be youth-led, if there's issues that you're feeling like should be on the agenda or in a way that would make things most accessible. I know that we have a number of folks here that are representing Spirit interns, and if there's any issues that you think that your life experience may impact in terms of having access and participating in an online forum, I invite you to speak on that too.
And Mr. Chair, I know you haven't moved to public comment yet, but once you make that turn, there is a hand up by Jill Ray.
I think I will make that turn. I think, yes, let me invite Jill to please to speak, and then others also after, please.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Dante. So here's between last month's conversation and this month's conversation. bringing forth what Cheryl was talking about with not everybody is comfortable talking, and that, incorporating something in writing, or, like Stephanie, I've seen some amazing stuff that Rise has done through music and song and poetry and all of that. I think that brings a message forward to those youth who maybe don't feel comfortable just talking. I also think about health services when they were working on some serious changes in their systems of care. They did what they called living room conversations. And I think, that sort of goes along the lines of what Stephanie does with Rise as well, with the smaller groups. And I just really, when I try and visualize this, I have a super hard time imagining this sort of format like we have for regular meetings, which, of course, are required by the Brown Act, in really facilitating that kind of conversation and that sort of comfort level, especially when you talk about, being open to the public. And I think the question is, do you want this to be an open public forum? Do you want answers to your questions? And then if that's the case, what are the questions? And could that be done in a way, in a safe space, facilitated by people who ensure that safe space? And then have sort of an overall outcome that's presented at a meeting that offers youth to participate as well, because we don't want to quell voices, but we also don't want to scare people from speaking the truth. And this can be a really intimidating format, quite frankly. And so I guess that's the question is, and then the other part that I think I brought up last time is, I am always wanting to hear from those people who have no voices. And so, Rise Center has a lot of voices who are out there ready to talk, and I think that's awesome. But how do we reach those children who haven't felt like they've had a voice, and to give them room for that voice? That's the extent of my comments.
Sorry, I see it in unmute there. Thank you, Jill, for your comments. And yes, I think we do need to keep in mind, in particular, what you were saying of making sure that this is going to be focused on ultimately generating contents that we are going to be using to inform our action, meaning that we're not just having this as performance to say that there was a space to have youth voices, but really trying to have something that's representative of a genuine sentiment, and that is representative of more than just a small number of people, so that we can take that and work moving forward, and not checking off the box. So yes, that it does need to be that. And I am thinking of, and maybe this will just be like another kind of popcorn concept. I put something out there and other people can connect to that or not, of maybe there is a smaller number of representative youth voices, something like that, that we're not really just trying to have an open call to anyone who may come, but try to almost as though prepare, not a facilitator, but panelists, so to speak, something like that. Several different people, youth voices, could have the opportunity to talk, and those people would be perhaps more already prepared, trained, and experienced as youth leaders, something like that, so that we're hearing voices directly from maybe voices that are more comfortable talking, but also have access to those who, as to your point, Joel, who may not be speaking, because there's sometimes this kind of distance of connection, right? I have a connection who has a connection who does, and sometimes if you have a youth leader, that person may have the proximity that's necessary. But again, let me then invite others to talk. And
Mr. Chair, we have two committee members who would like to provide some comments. First with Tammy, then with Stephanie.
Please,
Oh.
Tammy.
Yes, hello there. So a couple of thoughts have been running through my mind as I've been listening to the conversation, and I haven't been a part of the meetings. I need to I will catch up on the minutes. So maybe what I'm gonna state is already discussed. With that said, is that one thing I would like to know is regarding the time period, like how much time are we looking at when we bring these young people together to talk? Is it for an hour, 45 minutes? Have that already been discussed? That's one question I have.
We suggested last time doing a similar format as the previous, is doing the first hour is the community listening, the second hour business, kind of regular businesses we're doing today, but that was tentative.
Okay. Okay, and so thank you for that. So then the other thing that just came up to my mind as I was listening to Jill regarding when you have people who voices are not heard or they don't feel that they have a voice, and that's going to take some time in developing. So I see that as an arc that could take some time, that will take time to be able to get those young folks just feeling comfortable that what they're saying is not just going to go into this empty vacuum. What I'm experiencing is that people are kind of tired of talking. So that's one other point I want to make. And the last point I want to make is that whatever information that we are seeking, if we already have data that addresses why the issues are the way that they are, I think we need to be very transparent and put the data out there. So that way the young people will know that, okay, they're not starting from the bottom, that we have enough data that we can be able to say, here's why Black and brown young people are going and being incarcerated. So just let's be very about that. And that way I feel they will be able to say, okay, this group is not playing around. They're not just wasting our time trying to make us feel like we're important. And then there's not these action steps. So that's my feedback.
Thank you, Tammy. I hate to editorialize because I agree with everything you were saying, and I totally think we do need to take some of the data that we've already had assembled and given to some of us in these meetings and make that accessible at those meetings. But yes, there was another comment. Dante, who is next? I'm sorry.
Stephanie was your next member with us.
Oh yeah, please, Stephanie.
I just wanted to circle back to what I initially brought up, and Jill raised it as well. And I also see that it was talked about at the last meeting, but what's the purpose for the listening session? I think if we can determine that first, it will be a little bit easier to figure out what's the direction we need to go in. And so I'll raise that again, like what's the purpose for the listening session? Yeah.
I'll speak to try to capture what I remember the conversation last time, and invite this to also be continuing conversation. I think part of it is that I'm thinking along the lines of what Chris had said in the report about the work that we've done, and this is a point that's kind of come up over time, is, what is the work that we do of the racial justice oversight body altogether? And it is evolving in some sense. I mean, we have the work plan, but then it's also the things that come up, the things that aren't here that should be added or changed. And I think that these sessions, I mean, if we're going to be a subcommittee that is the community engagement subcommittee, that is sort of like the place of receiving the input on how is this thing accurately reflecting the work that we should be doing, kind of keeping us on track to, is this actually what community, so to speak, if we're doing community engagement, is this what community wants us to be doing, this work plan that we have? And then I think trying to have the community listening sessions are to the point that we can try to invite input on that it's an opportunity. We did it before, but we got sort of a skewed audience that didn't have as many youth voices. So we're trying to have representative of how are we doing? Are we on track? Is this what community wants us to be doing? And we're not hearing from youth voices. Then I think we're trying to adjust for that, to say that we didn't really have a representative turnout from what we wanted to see. And if we're going to try to say moving forward, well, this is what we heard back from community, that's a big missing spot in what we did last time. So we're trying to like have it adjusted in a way that we can do better.
Mm-hmm. And like, once again, that was kind of centered around the ranch closure, right?
Well, it became that, frankly. It didn't have any specific agenda. It was to be your invitation. And well, it kind of, that in a sense is an example of the ranch was not on our agenda, but it became sort of on the agenda after hearing that forum. And now we're talking about this. And similarly, I'm kind of hopeful that if we had a youth forum, there could be something that we didn't really know was as important, or there's something on the list that we hear is way more important than we thought, or I'm not sure, something like that, that it just kind of is a temperature check.
So yeah, I mean, it would be good to hear like from the rest of the group too around some of the ideas that folks may have. Yeah, because right now I feel we're kind of talking very broadly, and so trying to figure out how do we actually start zooming in on something a little bit more specific, and I think that could help.
Chris, see your hand.
Thanks. I had it raised digitally and physically there. So I would say I think the questions in the minutes or the record of action from last meeting seem to be a decent place to start. They seem centered specifically around school to prison pipeline issues and how those may impact our audience. I also heard, I think Steph brought this up, but if there's to be synergy between the different subcommittees, particularly say a diversionary subcommittee, and saying if we want to build out alternatives to incarceration or detention for youth, what should that look like? Or what do you need? What supports do you need? And where do you currently go to get those supports? You know, what community-based organizations, what resources exist in your community that support you and that you can rely upon, and what's missing and what do you need? I think those are some good places to sort of start, especially in terms of connecting this to what the diversion subcommittee is going to be trying to come up with. You don't have to stop it there. You know, in terms of, again, the school to prison pipeline issues that already were brought up for last meeting, those could also inform it. It's just a matter of figuring out which of those questions are going to be most important and prioritizing them. It may well be that some of the questions we have on the list need to wait for another listening session, or they may not all be covered in one, particularly if it's only going to be an hour. And I also think in terms of questions that you want to ask young people, I would say it's important in addition to the questions, you know, that I've sort of mentioned, which, you know, span a range of different topics. It may also be that we're not, as adults, asking always the right questions. And so it may be worthwhile to leave a bit of space. It doesn't have to be a lot, like 5-10 minutes at the end. What didn't we ask you? What are we not talking about that you want us to know? Even though we want to have specific questions to focus this, but what, in addition to, you know, these pointed questions we've asked, would you have us to know might be worthwhile to ask. The other thing that I would that I would raise for people to consider here. Hate to do it. Actually, two things. First of all, the ranch has been mentioned a lot. And I know that there was some level of development with the ranch. I'm not exactly clear in terms of the ranch closure, what exactly is going on now. I think there's an extended timetable for the overall resolution of that. And I bring that up just to say, like Jeff said, we didn't plan for that to control sort of the conversation. But if that still has yet to be resolved or finalized, then it may come up. And you know, to the extent that it affects young people themselves, right, or their friends or their peers who may either have the opportunity to, you know, be in a residential placement or to be in, you know, a juvenile detention facility, they may have thoughts and feelings about that. And the other thing is, you know, just a question. Sorry in advance, but I'm curious to what extent folks are willing to have this session be its own event. Going back to, I guess, what Dante was raising, but I'm saying whether or not any other entity joins with this effort, particularly because right now it has a date. And if that date changes or the day were to change, you know, to a day before or day after, so that you could still have this meeting and sort of take in or debrief the information that you get, but the actual event happens on its own, in its own space, and thus is less sort of less hindered, I guess, the discussion and conversation by, you know, some of the formalities that we have that may be less familiar or seem less navigable to some of the folks we would hope to attend.
Good points there. Good points there. Steph, I see you. Go ahead.
I was like, oh, I didn't raise my hand. I agree with everything that Chris just said. I do think like those two questions that you brought up are two places to start. And I just want to give an example. So at the end of July, we did a Reimagining Safety, Creating Healing-Centered Schools event. We had 4 different breakout groups that, and I'll put a link to our blog post so you can just kind of see kind of a little bit of what came out of it. But we had 4 different breakout groups, one centered around community campus security officers. One was around classroom environment and relationships between parents, teachers, students. Another group focused on just kind of like the facilities of the schools and also the community. So a lot of times what can be happening in the community ends up filtering into the school. And then we had another group around service navigation and what that looks like for young people that are systems involved, whether it's returning from a detention facility, if they're foster youth, if they are special education youth. Each one of those groups were co-facilitated with a young person, a parent, and another adult that had expertise in whatever area that was. So like we had somebody that had expertise in restorative practices, and so they were in one group. And they kind of facilitated, they had specific prompts that they asked the group and facilitated these conversations. And so it would be good if we could think about, okay, kind of broadly, what are some of the things that we are hoping to get from this? And maybe some prompts to kind of get things started. But how we actually set it up, our different facilitator teams I gave them a few instructions to kind of help guide them. And then they actually started thinking about things on their own that maybe I wouldn't have thought of because I don't have a child in one of the schools, right? And so it really helped to kind of guide the conversations a little bit more and really get some good data. And then also we did a graphic recording of the event, also thinking about how are we going to be getting this information to people in a more accessible way rather than just, you know, kind of regular old notes. But that could be something that we kind of think about doing. I think in the structure, we're very limited. And so we should think about how does it look like, what does it look like outside of this current kind of Brown Act structure that we live in.
Can I ask just a clarifying on that stuff? When you were saying that there were like, where there was co-facilitation, everyone is still in that example in their separate physical spaces. But was okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we had prep meetings to get them ready for the facilitation. But yeah, everything was virtual.
Okay.
But it worked out really good. And we got a lot of good information. So, I mean, it definitely can be done. Also, thinking about people that may not be able to make it and people that may not just want to talk in front of folks. The young people actually did a survey around some of the issues that were coming up for them. And so they developed, I forget how many questions it was, but they developed a survey and distributed the survey to get information from students within the district. And so doing both of those things could be a good option. And I know that you want this to be, we're kind of thinking that this is a youth-led, kind of youth-driven thing, but also thinking about the parents as well. So even though there were adults at that last community listening session, doesn't necessarily mean that there were parents that are impacted by the system as well.
Yeah. So many good points. I'm like, yes, I totally am there with this. Maybe if I'm just trying to put my facilitation hat on and say I'm hearing some of this coming from different voices, that perhaps this is not ideal format at our regular meeting to be having the sort of forum. We want to be working toward this and making sure that there's a space for youth voice, but perhaps our regular meeting time for variety of factors might not be the best way, but I'm just hearing that different voices, inviting others to chime in also. I'm gonna leave the space for that. Let's see. If we were to have a separate space, perhaps that makes sense. Maybe I'm just going to make that a little bit more of a firmer direction of the conversation. I'm going to propose then, perhaps based on this discussion, that we shift our proposal to having the November meeting of this group as the youth listening forum. Perhaps we should be shooting for or targeting to have a separate meeting in November. Let's still have that as a target time, but that it would not be one during our regular meeting in light of kind of the restrictions of the format that we're talking about. Is that resonating with people?
I mean, so just to be clear, I think the restrictions in this format are less about when you have the meeting and the fact that it happens through this body, right? So you can schedule, do whatever. I mean, I don't think you escape those restrictions. I mean, the requirements might shift a little in terms of how much notice or what have you, but but you still would be kind of in this kind of framework where you'd have to provide the notice, you'd have to do certain things, which I think is a lot of the things that people are concerned about in terms of how that would look and work. If it's a straight listening session, I think like you've done before, where you literally show up and just listen, that's one thing. But if you're talking about the opportunity for multiple members of this body or whoever to pre-work with young people, prepping them for what happens in the meeting, like that, really, yeah, that's where you get into a huge sticky area that's probably going to be very difficult, because now you're prepping for the meeting outside of the meeting, which would trigger all types of potentially trigger all types of issues, depending on who did that. Now, if this is someone like Burns doing, that type of lifting, you're in a completely different sphere potentially. But I think that the concern with the format the concerns with the format are less about when and more about the vehicle to which is happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, all right. I think some of it is a little bit kind of working through these same circles. I think it still makes sense after this meeting to have some kind of perhaps internal conversation with Haywood Burns on what sort of vision might be possible within the framework of this subcommittee holding something in some way. Right.
Yeah, I'd be happy to hop on a call, maybe yourself, our office, someone from Burns, and then if we can invite Stephanie as Representative Rise, who's worked with who have worked with youth in this capacity before, to maybe work this up and see what's realistic and what next steps would look like if there would be interest in having that conversation.
Yeah, I think that sounds great to me in terms of trying to move this forward, and maybe just to lift up also kind of content. What exactly will this be? We talked about sort of like the starter for that, and that there can be synergy with this, with the community capacity thing. The next item on our agenda, right, which is going to be talking about if we're going to have more funding for community-based organizations, and that's something that we want to have happen, that this can really be sort of framing that. We want to be sensitive to that. We may not even be asking the questions that are the most significant, as some voices have raised. And then also we want to have it guided as much as possible to make it not overwhelming for folks. There's a sense of like, what am I being asked? So that can be part of what we're inviting, is if you wanted to have alternatives to incarceration or punishment in your community, what would that look like?
What I might also advise is that we do have the assistant chief of probation on the call, and if we're thinking about how this intersects with JJCC, you might see if they'd be interested in having someone from probation leadership on this call as well to help inform that, to help inform these discussions. So, I mean, obviously I won't speak for Melvin or his executive team, but you might want to invite their participation potentially.
Absolutely.
And I'm with that, Dante. I think, like I said, whatever we can do to help facilitate any of the conversations or be a part of, the chief is fully invested in that.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's definitely the genuine impression that I had having the call about how can we work together on this and move it forward, which is exciting.
So what I'll do is, haven't heard if Stephanie would be interested in joining, but assuming that she is, I will first thing next week try to get try to carve out an hour for discussion between all those mentioned, Burns, yourself as chair, Jeff, staff, as long as you give me the thumbs up, and I'll include someone from probation on that as well.
Terrific.
I will be on the call.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm also, just as we're having that, rounding this out, and I'm looking at the notes from before, that Edward, you had volunteered at our last session to be
I think we lost
acting.
him. I think
Oh, we did.
lost him. I'm sorry. Yeah, he was on the other phone number that is no longer logged on. So I don't want you to waste your words speaking to someone.
No, I appreciate that. So then, right, not directed toward Edward, but to say that, maybe I'll just highlight that in the meeting before, he had volunteered to be the role of sort of facilitator, and if not exactly that, to lead our responses to what we would be hearing from youth voices in a session, and basically not having this sort of awkward receipt of information and then we just move ahead to our agenda, but rather having something saying, we respect what we heard, this is what we took from that, and that we're going to move this forward, and that he would be able to take that role. So we can invite him to be part of this planning moving forward too. I know he's not on the call right now, but I did just want to raise that also as something that we had in planning and in mind. So we'll invite him to take part in that when he's back on call, or when after this call. Before we turn to the next agenda item, are there other points that anyone on this call wants to add to that? And then maybe invitation if there's a specific vote that needs to happen now. I'm not sure that there does need to, but I'll just open that up. Thank you for being here, Marcus. So on this, is there, yeah, Chris, please.
I'll just raise, and I had to step out for a second or two, so I don't know if somebody covered this, but I'll just raise what I put in the chat, which is, sounds like we should hopefully get there with the intermediate call, but we should probably, in terms of voting for next meeting, we should probably be voting to finalize some language as far as what the questions are. We shouldn't be going past October not knowing what we're asking. So just want to raise that as a potential agenda item, if you guys see fit for next month.
Yes, I think that that's a good idea, that we have that for on the points that we need to finalize if we will still intend to have this in November. So there have to be those certain things that we specifically make sure that we check that box, and that would need to be one. So good point. Additional on this agenda item before we move to talking, and again, it's going to be some overlap, I'm sure, as we start to talk about capacity building fund concept, but if there isn't anything additional comment at this moment, then let me just transition to our next agenda item, and that, pulling up now. You guys know how this is, too many windows in this computer.
I came when you're looking for that, Jeff. I don't know if anyone who was on the phone wished to provide any public comment on that last item, but if you did want to raise your virtual hand, that would be *9. Again, star key followed by the 9 key, and you would need to hit *6 to unmute yourself. Again, that's star followed by the number 6.
That was a smooth transition, just saved me there, the timing. Okay. So invite you to chime in if there is anything. Looking at our agenda, this is the work plan that we have, the Focus on Capacity Fund. And maybe I'll just read some of this aloud to kind of ground where we are, because there are a number of different items that we are working on in terms of the scope of this work, but maybe just as a product of it being at the end of the work plan, sometimes we don't get there because we do the first parts of this and kind of like getting to the end of the alphabet sort of concept. But the idea is, and this is an objective that came from the Racial Justice Task Force. So we are, again, like at the very beginning of the meeting, we are taking the baton from the first part where they said, do this recommendation, and we're taking it off and we're supposed to be implementing. Establish a community capacity fund to build the capacity of community-based organizations, especially those staffed by formerly incarcerated individuals, to contract with the county and provide services to reentry clients. So I guess in as much, here's that baby crying. I don't know if you heard that. Okay. She's fine. The basic terms here, I think, are that we want to be building the ability of community groups, community organizations to fill in the societal response, right? Something happens with a young person in society, something happens with an adult, or another person is harmed, or there is property that's harmed, and there needs to be a response. And if we don't want it to be jail or probation or some other sort of punishment type form, well, then what would it look like? And there would need to be probably more investment in our community groups and our community organizations if we really intended to have an alternative. So that's what this is about. And it would more money for those groups. Some of it would be just, we need more people to implement the plan that we have, right? And some of it may be we need more technical assistance so that we can get more funding, or we need groups that do completely different resources than what are all together being provided, something like that. So that's just general context for this. Dante, was there something you were?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's important to disentangle those two, though, right? Which is, investments into communities for a certain type of services, and then building the capacity of those of providers to provide services, but also to be thriving organizations, right? Because the last thing you want to do is someone that's here today, gone tomorrow, and so you want to make investments into that nonprofit sector to be a strong sector. But then there's a separate need to, what services are necessary in the community, and we need to have providers that can provide those things. So being very targeted about how you support agencies, but it's one thing to provide X number of dollars as an alternative to incarceration. It's something else to have a community capacity fund that's explicit about building capacities of agencies in particular ways. So I don't think that they are like mutually exclusive, like you need one or the other, but they are explicitly different.
Yeah, that is good to bring up kind of the importance of the context here, and that it can't just be simply swap money in and out kind of equation, but that it's a different sort of investment and consideration of what's needed. And I think that's part of kind of the nuance to what it really needs to be and what it looks like, and what from the end, for example, of youth voices saying, well, this is what I really need to be receiving and I'm not receiving. And then also from providers to be saying, this is what I'm hearing that they need and I'm not able to provide. Things like that, that we may not be able to, I certainly may not have access to as someone who's sitting in this group. And that if we can try to inform basically ourselves with that we can better put together a plan for something like this for a community capacity fund. And I'm a little bit hesitant in exactly how we best take this on moving forward, meaning like how high the level are we going when we talk about establishing a capacity fund? Because it is getting technical, but I do think maybe it does make sense for us to talk together to the extent that we understand, or even if just to say that I don't know exactly how all this works, in that I did have some conversation with Chief Emmon Krause about, well, where would this sit, this community capacity fund? Like, would that be something that is there's a group or a kind of a subcommittee or body or something like that? And is that something that would live within probation, for example, department? And who funds this sort of thing? And because we can have a bigger sense that like it would be good to have money that is targeted to provide the need that's there, but in terms of how ultimately this would be, like, what are we envisioning being the apparatus for it, in a sense, right? That money would be there, but someone would be deciding how we're going to divvy this money up, and I'm thinking like on an annual basis. It's kind of saying some of these things out loud that are the assumed background. Like, I know what we're talking about, a community capacity fund, but like, who would be doing it and exactly how? I guess I'm imagining that perhaps it would be something that is part of the apparatus of the probation department, and that a lot of the funding streams that we would be thinking about that would do this would be coming through probation.
I think, in terms of the who and the what is probably, less important than, for what reasons or what types of things that you want this to support, right? And potentially, process questions such as, how much of these investments should be made, whether it sits in, one department or the other, what the questions are on the application. I think some of those things might be important, but I think the reality is, hey, when we speak about capacity, what are the capacities that we're trying to build? What is important? And are some of those input that can be made by these members, and are there some inputs that need to be garnered from somewhere else on what that needs to look like? And maybe having those type of discussions, because ultimately, whether it's one RFP, two RFPs, whether, probation has 2 seats on I think those will work out through the process. But really getting a sense of what you want this capacity fund to be and add, I think are definitely important discussions, especially in the context of racial justice, right? Because it might be interesting. We want to ensure that people are able to track data and provide information on racial disparities and those type of things, right? So I think that those are extremely useful, and might, and I'm sure a number of individuals might have comments to make in that regard. And I would also just say that you do have a committee member, Stephanie, that's looking to provide comments when you're ready.
Thank you, Dante. Steph, please.
Yeah, I was actually just gonna bring up some of what Dante already did, so I won't say too much. But I think it's important to figure out, what are the capacities that we're saying need to be built, and start formulating that first. Because I was thinking, are we talking about training? Are we just talking about providing just additional monetary resources? Like, what exactly is it that this would cover?
Right. Yes. And I think part of it is like approaching this from something of a distance how much would be the work of the group itself to make these decisions? If we have a community capacity fund that's operated by some people, to give them the ability to decide, well, this is how the funds need to be apportioned this way, really, in terms of training, capacity building, or just money for us to do our current operations, or so, right, having some structure of like, because we talk about it in a really general terms of like, what we're talking about is having money that would go to provide alternatives to incarceration, so to speak, but having something that's more focused, but still allowing whatever the people that are going to be doing the business of that money to say, this is really how this needs to be spent, rather than it being designated in advance. So,
right. Yeah, I just think it's important to create like parameters around that, right? So we don't have to dictate what, you know, like you're going to use it for this and that's it. But what are some of the things that may be coming up? So data, like Dante mentioned, data is one of the things that we've been pushing for. I mean, that the county in general needs to do a better job at. And so also knowing that that can be a difficult thing for different organizations to do as well. Like, how are they collecting data? Do they know how to collect data? A lot of the conversations that have come up in different meetings have been around evidence-based practices. And so if we have a group that's not necessarily designated an evidence-based practice, how are we helping them to build their work and still evaluate their work? Maybe they're not able to get to the evidence-based practice status, right? But we're still helping them build their capacity to do some good data collection and evaluation of their work. Or is it evaluation that they need funding for? So creating some type of parameters around.
Yeah.
The only thing I was going to add, Mr. Chairman, I know Chris also has a comment to make, is that, you know, in terms of like the logistics of a capacity fund, I mean, I can think of, I think two I can think, I'm not going to think of one for sure of where a jurisdiction has run a capacity fund. I believe I know some philanthropic money that has been used to do something similar, but that's just off the top of my head. You know, so I think that you can kind of be presented with models on this is how it might operate, right? But again, I think to Steph's point, you know, being clear about, you know, what the asks are, the intentions of the goals. I think that that's what would be unique to this body. You know, for instance, you know, maybe there's an ask that, you know, this funding informs some process to ensure that, you know, maybe there's other asks. You know, should we have a racial equity lens in terms of how other funding is distributed? That's not necessarily a capacity issue, but I think that those are the type of kind of recommendations that could come out of a body like this that can really inform that. In terms of the logistics, I mean, we can probably, you know, model after other places where we would be able to tweak it to fit our needs. But if we don't know what those needs are, kind of starting out, I think we'll be all over the place.
Yeah, good points for sure. You're reminding me that if I do remember correctly, the conversation with Chief Emmett Krause, that she was saying that Alameda County does have some sort of analog, and because she had been there previous to here, I think that this is right, but from the conversation it said that there was perhaps a larger pot of money there to be divvying up altogether, but there could be a model there to be one that we could work from here.
Yeah, the AB 109 funding that they carved out money for a capacity fund for that specifically, and that funding source specifically. Yes, so yes, that does exist.
So yes, that's definitely something that I think makes sense for us to be considering as using a model. And
could that be one of the things that we have for the next meeting as well? Maybe not just Alameda, but a few different jurisdictions.
As potential models, things that we could try to use as we're thinking of moving forward, that's a good idea.
And just a reminder, Chris James had a comment as well. He has his hand raised.
Hi, Chris. Please. Thanks.
So two things. First, along the lines of the larger conversation we've been having up to this point, I'm curious if there's any sort of institutional knowledge, if you will, from members of the Racial Justice Task Force who would have developed these recommendations in terms of what a community capacity fund should be and what sort of inspired that recommendation that could lend themselves to sort of fleshing some of this stuff out. I know I raise that question a lot when we sort of get to this point and we're trying to figure things out, but that's always because, you know, like Jeff pointed out for everyone, that's sort of where our mandate comes from, just wanting to be true to that to the extent that there's something to be true to. And then the next thing that I would say is in terms of the models, having models or examples for next meeting, I think that's a good idea. And I think that means for us, right, some work, not just in terms of compiling a bunch of pages, but to paraphrase something that Dante said to me in the past, right, bring a slide deck rather than a bunch of pages. I think that's probably what we're going to need to do. So we're probably going to want to summarize some of this stuff at a high level in a way that is easily digestible so that we can talk through it, as opposed to providing people 47, 32, 20 pages, you know, worth of models that'll make the agenda really long and then nobody's going to actually read.
Look at it.
Just being real. Good point.
I was thinking like maybe 3 or 4 models.
Yes. Yes. Oh yeah, please go ahead.
To Chris's point, I can't really remember kind of all of our thinking around the capacity building fund. I mean, I think part of the thinking was around some of the things that have already been brought up around data collection and evaluation. I think there can always, depending on how well big or small an organization is, even around reporting and building up those skills around reporting once they do receive an RFP, also just applying for RFPs. I think we've also brought up even the accessibility of knowing when RFPs come out. That doesn't necessarily have to do with the funding, but just how we're communicating about different funding opportunities.
Yeah, what I would just add is that, you know, I do remember where this conversation came from. It did largely come from, so the thread of conversation initially was around funding related to like 109 or other resources, and to increase funding to community programs, especially the percentage of funding that we use for justice-related issues. And then from that, this was kind of an offshoot of that to say, and some of that funding should be to build those organizational capacities like they did in Alameda. I think we've done some lighter touch capacity building. I want to say theirs, this is just off the top of my head, was about 5 million. And I think ours was a couple 100,000, if I remember correctly. And so I think that this conversation started on that thread of there's more investments in this being a particular type. And those numbers were both, yes, sorry, I'll leave it there.
That history context is really helpful, important to know, you know, where this has come from and kind of what steps have kind of already gotten us here, so to speak. I would just also lift up what you were saying, Dante, about there being something in it coming from this group, if we're shaping this process, that there be something explicit in terms of racial equity lens, in terms of what when we're talking capacity, I think that can be part of the capacity of an organization. Is if you're going to be able to provide services to our community, you're going to be able to have that competency to truly meet the needs of community to do this work. So that can be something we can include as an expectation for service providers and a capacity building component, as I'm thinking if we have like a broad interpretation of what that might mean. Others' thoughts just on this, on basically what this might look like, next steps. We have some specific proposals, and I think the idea to keep it limited in the scope of what we're going to try to have as potential models for next time if we come back to this, because I think I'm gonna, as I see that we've got just 3 minutes remaining here, would like to come back to this next time, and perhaps when we come back next time we can have 2 to 4 something like that potential models that we can have on a summary form, which is not the full proposal RFP 300-page dump or something, but really can say these are the main points and this is why it might work here or not. Chris, I saw you unmuted. Maybe there's something to add, or
completely inadvertent.
Okay, I know how that is. Any other items on this before we return? Well, I guess I should say that we will intend to come back to this next meeting. We'll also come back to the youth forum. We have points on that. I do want to leave just a minute or two if there are any announcements or final comments that public has.
And I would just remind our lone phone caller to get acknowledged. Please hit *9 if you would like to raise your hand. And then once identified, you hit *6 to unmute yourself.
And maybe as we just have another moment here, that I know that we do have.
No hands at this time, Mr. Chair.
Sure, thank you. I was just going to say that I know that we had a number of community voices introducing connection with spirit, and maybe there's any one of the folks that are here connected might want to say a word on, what spirit is and how you've come to this meeting. No pressure, just I think there are some folks that don't know Spirit program.
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Chaplain Bobby Creekmore. I'm a Spirit student. The Spirit is a program that was introduced beginning in 2004 with the legislature of California that passed drawing funding from the millionaires of California. So 1% of the tax of millionaires goes to fund the program. Spirit students are looking for people who have lived experience with or mental health, substance abuse, or has family that has those issues and lived experience, because in the mental health field it has been found, shown, and proven that people who have lived experience with these sort of things have more of an understanding and compassion. We are not clinicians, we're not doctors. We're just, just like you and me. And often people can open up and feel more free to talk to somebody who has lived experience with these sort of things. And so when we're graduating, and thankfully class of 2020 is graduating in just a few short weeks, we will hold a certificate certifying us as peer support specialists. And that's my brief take on it. I would like to invite another Spirit student to fill in if I happen to leave anything off.
Thank you so much. Yes, and I'll join in that invitation if there's anyone else.
You do have a hand raised by Mr. Richard Pinkerton.
Please, yes.
Yes, I appreciate this presentation. It's the first time I've sat in on a board meeting like this, so to speak. I'm also quite intrigued and interested by the topic that was discussed today about youth incarceration and racial justice, because when I came out from Philadelphia in 1974, I was a counselor teacher in a reform school that was court adjudicated inner city ghetto Philadelphia kids, about 250. And so I had a little bit of experience of working with the youth. And right now I'm interning at Native American Health Center in Richmond. And so this was informative, and I'm looking forward to the next meeting. I think you said that's going to be in October, November 12th, I have on my calendar now, but following up on this discussion about the necessary treatment and mindfulness and wellness of the youth. I mean, I'm a senior citizen, so I'm past my youth, but I'm really interested in this issue. So I appreciate this whole discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the next in is Chaplain Creekmore.
So I realized right when I was finished that Chairman Jeff Landau mentioned, you know, if we could fill us in on how we heard about this. And the Office of Consumer Empowerment is the office that is in charge of our Spirit instruction, and the Office of Consumer Empowerment, as I've already shared with Stephanie Medley privately in chat, would be interested in hearing from organizations like hers and others. And they sent us out an email letting us Spirit students know about this meeting today, and we're actually getting internship hours for being here in the meeting today. But it's been a really good and informative meeting, and I really appreciate being here. So if you're interested in learning more about the OCE, or the Office of Consumer Empowerment, Andrew Thompson and Cindy, if she's still here, is actually interning over there, and I will put a few phone numbers to the OCE in the general chat.
Very cool. Andrew Thompson, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in, express my thanks for you guys having us. This has been really informative, and Bobby, you did a great job explaining the Spirit program. We're all working towards the end of the program now in our internships, and I happen to be with the Office of Consumer doing mine. And one thing I just wanted to say, so that those who are working in committees like these are aware of it, that this subject is a really big one right now. And I think it's impacting all aspects of the peer support, peer specialist programs. We're one of them. Just so you know, it's been on the radar. It's been on OCE's radar, and also the Clubhouse system radar. So this is a very hot topic and a necessary one, and I think it's going to be become a mainstay in the times following this particular term. So thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, well said, Andrew.
Really glad that you've joined us. Maybe we'll just take a second to say that I do represent clients in assisted outpatient treatment, Laura's Law, and also as conservatorship counsel for our county. So a lot of overlap there, and really glad that we are having robust participation. Just as I'm hearing voices talk a little bit more from Spirit, it's coming to my mind of community capacity needs to include dual diagnosis. That's always something as an advocate for persons in criminal justice system where certain organizations can do one or the other, but not both. And so many people, they're inextricable, they're intertwined. You can't separate them, is what I meant to say. So different voices coming to the table help us see the things that need to be discussed and included in the conversation. So I'm appreciative of your participating and of everyone here. Let me just have maybe final call. I know we're a couple of minutes after. If there's any final public comment before we wrap up our session for today.
Maybe, I don't know, Fred, were you trying to make a comment? No, he took himself off mute. I thought he might have been trying to comment, but
Mr. Getz?
No, I just took myself off from mute because I thought we were going to be saying goodbye pretty soon. I just want to say that I appreciate all you folks letting us be part of your meeting. It's really mind blowing because, you know, before Spirit, I really didn't go to a lot of meetings, and there's a lot of good stuff you're doing, and I just hope for more equality and unity. And that's all I've got to say.
Good final words. Thank you, Mr. Getz. Yeah. So again, my thanks to everyone for participating. I will just say that our next meeting would be scheduled for October 8th, I would think, is our generally second Thursday of each month. This will be subject to receiving on the county website. You'll have the agendas sent out and the most current information, but that's generally when we will be. And we were talking November for our potentially listening session, but you can have another session with us in October for the subcommittee. And be safe, do justice, be kind to others, all that good stuff. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Y'all come back now, yeah?
Indeed.